but I will introduce myself. My name's Dr. Stephen Perry. I'm the interim dean of the Robertson School of Government at Regent University. And this webinar series that we are doing, Keep the Flame Burning, is the idea really came up because, we saw things like, candidates who suddenly couldn't hold their rallies, our presidential candidates. We saw the state of New York who canceled their primaries. And so we begin thinking, how are people going to continue the democratic process in a time where we have social isolation, social distancing, when people are stuck at home and they can't gather in groups. And if someone comes and knocks on your door, you probably just peek out the window. You don't want to open the door because you don't know what the virus will be doing outside. So anyway, it's a time where our politics has been changed. And so we have put together a set of panels that this is our third in the Keep the Flame Burning series. And so this panel, Finding and Reaching Your Majority from at least 6 feet away. That's really, it's kind of my favorite title, I think, of our panels for the 3 days that we're doing this. So again, welcome as you're joining us, and welcome to all our panelists. I'm going to introduce to you our host, our moderator, I should say, for this event. But before I do that, let me just tell you our co-moderator is going to be Kylan Griffith. And at the end of this event, she's going to be looking for questions that are posed by the audience. And she will pick the best questions. She will then read those to our panelists and let them answer them at that time. So as the panel gets talking, as people start discussing, I just encourage you to post questions that you think of, questions that you would like to hear our panelists respond to, and see if you can get an answer to that. I posted a question in the last session and we never got to my question. So hopefully we'll get to your question today. So Kylan will be doing that for us, but Henry Jones is our moderator for this session. He's the co-founder, president, and member of the board of directors of the International Christian Foundation of Democracy. Henry's a communications and advocacy expert with more than 20 years in American and international public affairs practice. He's conducted political campaigns, managed crisis communication efforts, and guided long-term advocacy campaigns on 5 continents and in more than 54 countries and territories. Previously, he served as the CEO of the Laris Group, director for Europe at Barbin, Griffith and Rogers, and as the International Republican Institute's director for Central and Eastern Europe. He is a recipient of the Global Leadership Award, granted jointly by the Leadership Institute, the Bow Group, and the World Congress of Families, and the Institut de Formation Politique. Henry holds a Juris Doctorate from Whittier College and Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the California State University. He resides in Arkansas with his wife, 4 children, and 3 grandchildren, where he works for the Arkansas Secretary of State. So, Henry, thank you for moderating for us, and I'll let you introduce our panel.
Thank you. I'm grateful and honored to be here, Dean Perry. We have some amazing panelists today. And first of all, you notice we have, and I'm going in no particular order other than what is in our biography listing. We have Mr. Corey Lewandowski, who is the senior advisor to President Trump's 2020 campaign and to Vice President Pence's PAC, the Great America Committee. Prior to this role, he was both chief political advisor and campaign manager to Donald Trump. In 2016, I think we all remember Mr. Lewandowski's role and have seen him numerous times on national media and are grateful for all the work that he does. Moving on from Mr. Lewandowski, we have Mr. Gabor Bacelli. He is the director of the Robert Schuman Institute for Developing Democracy in Central and Eastern Europe, based in Budapest, Hungary. The RSI works as the educational center of the European People's Party, family of 83 members and 43 countries. And for those of you that are not familiar with the European People's Party, it is the party grouping for the European Parliament, and it is a connection of center-right parties across Europe. And it's a fabulous organization, and we're very grateful to Mr. Bacelli for being here. He has 20 years experience in international project management, as well as academic research and teaching. He has master's degrees in English, Central European history, and has started a PhD program in American Studies with a diplomatic history focus. We also have Mr. Kenneth Bricker here. Ken is a political communications and foreign policy specialist with more than 30 years of experience working as a journalist, a political strategist, and contractor with the U.S. Army and U.S. Department of State, and is a senior manager of international development programs in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Mr. Matthew Klink. Matt has more than 27 years of experience working on complex, controversial, and high-profile issues for public and private sector clients, as well as candidates for elected office and ballot measure campaigns. Matt recently served as lead consultant in opposition to a controversial property tax measure in the greater Los Angeles area. Outspent by more than 6-1 and facing widespread support from area politicians, Klink developed and implemented a highly targeted opposition campaign that helped the initiative's proponents to pass 46% of the vote, pardon me. So that was quite an accomplishment. And Matt has worked throughout his career for numerous clients, encompassing a range of industries and subjects. And he's a very adept communicator, and we are very grateful to have him here with us. Liz Dickinson is the Virginia Director for American Majority. She has a background in activism, outreach, county leadership, and national security. Recruited by the CIA during graduate school, Liz moved to Virginia and began her career as an intelligence analyst. She briefed and wrote finished intelligence for senior U.S. officials and Russian political military issues. I am sorry. My glasses probably need to be changed. I can't see that well. She wanted to become directly involved in the political process and left the CIA to become involved in the local Republican Party. And she has a master's in international policy studies and non-proliferation and a Bachelor of Arts in Russian and political science. She's a news junkie who enjoys politics, international relations, and spending time with her family. A lover of all things Virginia, she is excited to work with conservatives across the Commonwealth, and she resides with her husband and their 7 children in Leesburg, Virginia. So thank you all here and welcome. I'm grateful for your participation. I'd like to open this up with a question to the audience. As in the chat section, you can type in comments, chats, and so forth. So we're going to do an informal poll. If you would please just let us know during the COVID crisis, are you hearing not enough from political campaigns, too much, or just enough? So please go ahead and type that into the chat now. We'll come back to that later. But let's throw this out for initial conversation to the panelists. Our first topic, I think, is what do voters want from from political parties during the crisis, and how do we know what it is that they want? Who'd like to start with this?
Well, Hank, I'll go first if no one else will. I think what voters do not want is for you to come and visit them at their home doing door-to-door campaigning. That's one thing I'd like to start with, because that's the principal tactical shift that COVID-19 is bringing us. I actually have a somewhat contrarian point of view on this. I don't think that campaign strategies are going to matter very much. They're not going to change. I think tactically campaigns will change a great deal. But I think that voters are still figuring out what they want to hear from politicians. I do have one negative. I think that the response to this will be politicized, as everything is these days. But I don't see any major changes coming along in terms of campaign strategies. Campaigning is still campaigning. The idea is to get more votes for your candidate than the other. I think that will remain the same.
I can add something to that too. So we do know through public opinion research that has been conducted specifically in California that I'm aware of, but I assume that holds for the rest of the United States, that right now, and this will change as the stay-at-home orders get loosened, right now voters want 2 things. They want, 1, to know that they're going to be safe. And 2, as we start to reopen, they want confidence that they can move about and conduct life at some semblance of normalcy, and ultimately that the economy is going to recover so that they have a job to return to, that they can put food on the table for their families, et cetera. And I think that between those 2 guardrails, that is ample fodder for politicians in both parties to campaign. The challenge that they face now is how do they do it? Because you're right, well, you can't go door to door or hold a massive rally in a gymnasium somewhere. There are lots of ways that campaigns right now are using to reach voters. I'm sure we'll delve into that.
I like to say with American Majority, we're obviously not a campaign and we don't work directly with campaigns, but we operate similar to campaigns when we are in our GOTV phase. And doors are the biggest way that we connect with voters in general. But this year, obviously, we're kind of playing it by ear right now. We're actually in the process of doing a survey online to kind of gauge the comfort of people that's coming to their doors. And we're going to do another survey in several weeks to see if the comfort level has gone up or has it stayed the same. But in the meantime, we're planning, you have to really now focus on phones. So in general, we don't like to do phones very much because it's a lot of answering machines. But the benefit right now is that there are a lot of people home and more people are answering the phone than they had previously. And part of that is some people just want to have someone to talk to. I've actually had some good conversations with people where normally you just get a lot of short answers and hangups, but more people are willing to talk to you. Sometimes not even necessarily about why you've called, but they just want some connection. But if you're the person reaching out to them and making the connection, even so much as helping them, like if they say they're unemployed or they're having some issues, you can be the person that actually even looks up the resources for them while you're on the phone and be that person and the face of that party that's helping them. And they'll remember that in November as well. But I agree, for right now, we have to change everything because doors aren't working. And we even for like fundraising and things, we usually rely on events like to meet with donors and things like that. You just can't do that right now.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments on that? I mean, how do we know? Have methodologies changed in reaching voters at this point, since everybody more or less is home one way or another? Has that changed the way that we're gathering public opinion surveys? Or are things pretty much the same?
Well, and I don't want to hog the spotlight, but having done a lot of polling recently, the challenge anyway with any survey research now is the number of people that don't have landline telephones has increased. I think it's like 53% across the United States. So pollsters have to be more creative, not only in terms of talking about landline or mobile cell phones, but there also are rigorous ways of doing online surveys. Not those things you see in the Dredge report that can be manipulated, but scientifically valid survey instruments that you can target people and you can get statistically valid samples. So I think the industry was adopting anyway, but I agree with what Liz said. We are finding people at home. They're more than happy to answer questions just because it's a break from their normal routine.
I guess it also depends in what phase of this crisis your campaign is taking place. Also meaning how long people have been stuck inside their homes, because as we are taking our whole life to digital, it also means that the last things we want to see is another digital something popping up and somebody else wanting to take us online to fill a survey or watch whatever content. We'll be happy to just go to our gardens, take a book, and forget about all the online noise. So it's also a challenge in that way.
Yeah, and you've been in lockdown longer than we have, so I guess you're kind of experiencing the lockdown burnout that is starting to take place here as well in the political environment.
As a person who's walked a lot of neighborhoods in my life for over 35 years, we always focused on at least trying to get the candidate's message out by at least getting a door hanger on a front door. There seems to be a difference between going door to door and hanging a door hanger with the candidate's message, or maybe even a door hanger that would announce a Zoom meeting that they could join online to interact with the candidate. Does anyone on the panel see a difference between going out and just focusing on getting door hangers put out as opposed to knocking on doors and expecting someone to actually answer the door?
Well, Mark, let me say this as Corey. What we've seen from the Trump campaign is our ability to reach people has actually increased. And the reason I say that is because just on Friday night, I had the opportunity to join Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio and Zoom into a call in Arizona. That was something that we never would have been able to do under a normal circumstance. So we're using surrogates here at the Trump campaign to reach out to places where historically we wouldn't have had that opportunity to have large gatherings of people across thousands of miles who can now hear directly from these individuals about why they're supporting the president or what they're trying to do to help the president, and getting that same feedback. So we've tried to use this as an opportunity to solicit information from people who we wouldn't have historically had the opportunity to talk to just from geographic distance reasons.
That's a good point, Corey. And it brings up a next question, which is, what is the messaging you're putting through that? Is that typical campaign messaging, or are you dealing more with crisis-oriented conversations?
Well, what we saw on Friday night's call, as an example, was a 9 o'clock Eastern call, a 6 o'clock Arizona call, was they were then thanking the president for the flyovers that some of the states were having. But in addition to that, these are really the hardcore supporters who want their government to pay attention to them. By and large, the people who are taking to their state capitals saying, let's open up the government again. We want to get back to work in a responsible, personal responsibility fashion. But they want us to carry that message back to the president, to the senior campaign people, so that they can articulate that, so that governors around the country and members of the federal government can understand that they agree with what the president has said. You can't have the solution be worse than the virus itself. And right now, as we enter week 8 of the lockdown, I believe, and we've seen from the campaign, many people are encouraging us to get the government back open, to get people back to work in a responsible manner, but they want that outlet. They want that voice, the opportunity to articulate that. And these Zoom calls like this and Skype have given them some opportunity they probably wouldn't have had.
Well, this begs another question for all of you. I heard Rod Nearing the other day mention that political parties are the largest social networks in the world. And there's some truth to that. And in this type of instance, and we can get into incumbency versus challengers later too. In this type of instance, political parties seem to have had to pivot quite a bit, change their messaging, change their outreach in several ways, so that they're serving more of a social service function than simply like say an advertising or marketing function. Do any of you have experience with this? Any thoughts, comments, particularly you, Gabor, in Europe? Is there anything that's going on like that there?
Well, I mean, of course, this crisis moment is an opportunity for incumbents who have access to totally different communication opportunities, using all the broadcasting possibilities at the disposal of governments and incumbents in general. And as people are really tuning in to all the news about what is the next step of crisis management response from authorities, public institutions. That's a very powerful voice. That's a very powerful communication that is extremely difficult for anybody from the sidelines or from oppositions to match or challenge. Mm-hmm. Also comes with the difficulty that let's say in a critical situation, there is an expectation of pulling together, doing things together, some kind of unity. So any kind of challengers, different voices start with this kind of handicap. And here we could also see some differences in Europe, because of course, in the US, you're in a different stage with primaries, but here we already had some election campaigns, notably local election campaigns in the first quarter. The UK has decided to postpone them. They should have taken place in May. They are now off to 2021. The French have gone ahead with the first round of local elections in mid-March, but canceled the second part. And the Bavarians in Germany held both of the parts. So it's 3 different kind of cases we can look at. We can see that the French and the Germans have really extensively turned to digital campaigning. You know, even as early as first part of March, the public gatherings were out of question. Any kind of public events over 100 people, any kind of organized meetings with supporters and politicians were out of question. So the political parties had to switch very quickly their strategies. sometimes even changing the whole election system. So the Bavarians organized a postal voting for the second round in just 2 weeks' time. It was a challenge for the whole election headquarters, not only the political parties. Yeah, we are seeing some sudden switches and decisions where people would have debated in boardrooms for months and years, like, oh, that's not feasible, we don't have the resources, that's not really our thing. But when necessity comes, then okay, from one day to the next, it's suddenly possible.
Huh. Well, we've seen some very creative pivots, and again, from what Corey was saying, with the president's rallies and some of the meetings and so forth, going virtual and then getting not just a political message, but a message from the population to the decision makers in the government or those who hope to be. There is, of course, a big focus on people's concerns with what's going on, whether we're dealing with not having a job or not having access to what they feel is healthcare that's necessary to deal with the crisis. So again, as a social service organization, let's say, I'm sorry, as a party, do you see examples of many parties moving into that role where they're, Mark, not just leaving door hangers, but maybe leaving, mask or some sort of, crisis response kit at the doors? Are we purveying information through political parties that might normally be coming through governmental channels? And are you aware of any campaigns doing creative responses such as these?
So Hank, you just gave me a great idea. Just as campaigns used to distribute potholders and door hangers, I'm sure that some enterprising candidate will be distributing a face mask with his or her campaign logo on the front of it. That's a great idea that I'm sure someone will capitalize if they haven't already. Corey, you may want to write that down for
I've already seen a Trump branded mask, so I think they're pretty far ahead of the game on that. I've seen a few others too, but have any of you been employing any of these pivots really in your own personal actions?
Well, I can tell you one of the things the Trump campaign did, and they actually did it anonymously, was the campaign started feeding first responders, those frontline workers, sending food to places. And look, it ended up that the story got out and it was covered fairly widely. But in the places that were hardest hit at the very beginning of the outbreak, Washington State, New York, the campaign was sending food and resources there as a sign of a thank you to those first responders, not as a sign of, hey, we want you to vote for Donald Trump because we don't truly believe that Washington State or New York City is in play, but it's just the right thing to do. It's the humanitarian effort, and it's a campaign, that's probably going to raise and spend north of $1 billion, and it's a sign of thank you for first responders who are on the front trying to keep us safe. It was something the campaign thought of and did, and we now see, obviously, corporate America. I think McDonald's is doing it. If you're a first responder of any nature and you've got identification, they're giving free meals out to everybody as a thank you for that. And I think that's really something that campaigns should have been doing from the very beginning, and the party should be doing it as well, because these are very well-funded political operations who have the financial resources by and large to do these things.
It's a tricky thing with the giveaways because at a certain stage, people are just very careful not to touch things coming from God knows where. So finding something on your door handle, I don't know. We have seen this challenge with let's say the initial supporting signatures for candidates. So how do you make somebody sign up on your sheet? And some people have come up with ideas like, okay, just really put a desk in your front yard with boxes of disposable pens, so people would not be worried that okay, I have to use this after I don't know how many people. So there is this kind of tricky thing about the giveaways. On the other hand, we see also interesting responses from institutions, maybe not political parties or politicians, but I could just think of the European Parliament, for example, that is also in lockdown. People are working from home office, but they have a huge canteen. And the canteen of the European Parliament is now cooking food for the homeless and the needy. It's in a way reflecting very well on the reputation of an institution that for most common people previously it's somewhere in a bubble, distant from the people, and now showing a very humane face.
Very
Third
good.
thing is when you look at Eastern Europe, such kind of aid is traditionally well, it's pretty much like bribery. People handing you the I don't know the boxes of flour and oil and grechka and whatnot. That is not the first association of people in such countries that okay, it's a humanitarian response from politicians or parties, but okay, they are coming for my vote.
No, that's a good point. And how important do you all think it is for parties to be involved in more of a humanitarian approach rather than just maintaining constant issue and candidate messaging?
Well, hey,
I think it's very important because, I mean, like I was saying with the phones, for example, when you're helping people right now, people are stressed. Some are getting antsy too, but a lot of people are still stressed about going out or communication, you know, face to face. Helping them with needs that they actually have right now. They'll remember later that, you know, you're the party that, you know, reached out to them and that helped them. I mean, think about, you know, like when our grandparents came from other countries or great grandparents came to other countries, they were, I mean, my great grandparents were Democrats. And the reason was those are the people that met them on the boat. They helped them with jobs. They gave them money when they got here and they remembered that. And no matter what the policies changed to, they were loyal to them forever. And that's what they always would say was because they're the people that met their needs when they were in need. So I think it's very important.
That's a great point. So this is key. Ken?
yeah, the one thing all voters are looking for is relatability. They want to know that their political leaders or the people that they intend to vote for understand the world in the way they do and are sympathetic to their needs. So I agree completely with what you just said.
And Mark, I'd like to start with you because I think in terms of this panel, you are the closest to the ground and what's happening on the campaign level, door to door. A lot of changes have been created because of this virus. And can you, just in terms of messaging and events, fundraising, field operations, I mean, we could spend a whole day on this, but just in terms of particularly, you know, with the campaigns you're involved with and you're having a look at, what are the biggest changes you're seeing?
Well, the main thing, because we can talk about campaigning all day long, but the main issue is ballot access and getting prepared for circulating petitions. It's not real sexy to talk about as far as how, you know, campaigning goes, but we're not going to achieve getting on the ballot until we can figure out how we can actually circulate petitions. And I think Gabor even brought that up in his most recent commentary there about signing a sheet of paper and disposable pens and all of that. I mean, it seems to be that we need candidates out there that are out there talking about, you know, the threat to democracy from the standpoint of ballot access and allowing for policies to be put forward from candidates that can talk about how can we maybe, you know, shift this to some sort of digital sort of access of ballot access to help. The campaigns I'm involved with, they're very concerned about fundraising. You know, there's not anything that's, you know, the rubber chicken dinner circuit, if you will. County parties that want to support people like myself in the past that were county board candidates, the Reagan Lincoln dinners, you know, that raise money that actually would flow into local campaigns. That sort of resources are drying up. So there's going to need to be a lot of, you know, creative thinking going forward to figure out how we can re-engage people at the local level, because right now they're hunkered down in their homes. They're being told to, you know, stay home, go out, maybe get toilet paper, but then immediately come back home. And I do think that campaigns are going to have to inject, like never before, digital strategies that do as much as they possibly can to connect with people.
Thank you. And Matt, I'd like for you to talk a little about that as well, because I know you have extensive experience in petitions and
So
ballot.
we have this funky system in California, the initiative process, where citizens can actually put measures on the ballot. And the number of signatures you need is mandated by a percentage of the vote cast in the previous election. So to qualify a statewide ballot measure, you need to submit 690 plus thousand signatures, which means you need to gather about 1 3/4 that number to make sure that they're validated. And we actually saw a number of statewide initiatives in circulation stop because that very reason that Mark brought up and that the board brought up is that they couldn't get people to sign. There were ways around it, where everybody would get their own unique pen and they would sign their own sheet of paper. But a volume operation like that, and these are well-funded campaigns. When I'm working on one right now to fight a massive property tax increase at the state level, we're looking at a $150 million ballot measure. So we're well-funded, but it's the state rep, certain congressional districts, and the local races. They don't have that kind of money. They rely on people power to go out and pound the pavement to get those signatures. That's where we're really going to suffer. And that's what we don't have an agreed upon workaround yet, where there's a confidence that someone's not sitting in a room signing with different colored pens and turning in falsified signatures versus we just need to get people so that there are competitive races on the ballot. And the same holds with voting too, which is a whole nother kettle of fish that we can talk about at some point. But ballot access is absolutely critical. And the well-funded campaigns, it's no problem. They'll figure out a workaround. It's the little races and the local races or the state rep races that nobody really knows about. Those are the ones that are going to really suffer.
Well, that's a good point. And funding is obviously an issue. With the larger campaigns, it's easier to essentially just take out ads and through social media. Smaller campaigns maybe don't have the resources to even do that. So the question has always been, how do you get those resources? But there have been a lot of creative adaptations of fundraising. And I know that George P. Bush was doing Netflix and chill fundraisers where he would basically let his donors choose a movie and they would watch it together over, a connection like Zoom or Skype and watch the movie together and, have dinner together, that kind of thing virtually. So I'd like to start with Corey, talking about maybe some things that the president's campaign is doing fundraising wise along these lines that are unusual and innovative, and then throw it out for the rest of you to chime in with any what would be useful or advised to our audience.
Well, what we've seen from the Trump campaign really is trying to help the local county parties and the state parties raise resources. And we've seen it be very successful because individual candidates have not had the opportunity really since the coronavirus pandemic broke the second week of March to go out and raise money. And we've seen that in the first quarter fundraising numbers. When you look at what the Democrat candidates who are running for the United States Senate have been able to do, basically outraise all of the incumbent Republican senators in the first quarter, it is because of the sophistication of an organization called Act Blue, which is their online fundraising tool, which they've been able to build over the course of 4 or 5 election cycles. We now have a program called Win Red. We want all of those elected officials who are running for office, whether it's a United States Senate race, a congressional race, or even the down ballot local races, to get into the Win Red program. What that is, it's a clearinghouse of a site where you can go on, you can put in your credit card information, you can choose to then fund 1 or 100 candidates, and the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, background work is completed for you. When you look and you see that Lindsey Graham, the incumbent U.S. Senator in South Carolina, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, was outraised by his opponent in the first quarter. And you see that Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, outraised by his opponent in the first quarter. Even under the notion that we've got this coronavirus pandemic, Democrats did a very good job raising money. Later today, I'll be participating in a call with some donors in the state of Ohio to raise money for the Ohio Republican Party. It's something that's very common now that we're doing. Again, we're bringing surrogates to those different states through the opportunity that Zoom provides, through the opportunity that Skype provides, get major donors on the internet, having direct conversations and raising money for those state parties so they can continue to fund those local races. Because at the presidential level, we're going to have a lot of money. We've got about $250 million in the bank right now, and we continue to raise money. But what we need in order to help the president is to have the resources down ballot, those local county commissioner races, state representatives, state senate races, those individuals who are driving people to the polls because of the personal relationships. That helps the president. So we're spending an enormous amount of our focus right now, raising money through Don Jr., Kimberly, Eric, and everybody else in the campaign structure, Brad Parscale, helping those county parties and those state parties raise money so they'll have the resources down ballot to ultimately help in November.
Thank you. And that is a tremendous asset to the down ballot candidates. Does anyone else have anything to throw in from what else has happened in this area? With, say, I know the Biden campaign is doing very similar things. Is there a lot of support, or is this something that people are just feeling their way along in terms of organizing more coordinated fundraising campaigns, during the crisis? Any ideas on that?
I think that the local folks are still reeling and still trying to kind of get their bearings on what direction they want to move. And hopefully over here through the summer going into the fall, there can be some meetings and some people putting their heads together. But I honestly think that people are still trying to figure out how to attack, the basic problems surrounding having your entire society shut down.
Yeah, well, I think just, again, focusing on our very niche topic of political fundraising during this virus, I think that what the president is doing is actually a pretty good example of what should be done. And just for the folks that are listening, and please anyone else chime in, this is what parties are supposed to do. Your party organization is there to support you as a candidate. If you're having trouble with funding these kind of things, ask for help. Throw this out as an example. This is what parties are supposed to be providing, and we all have to be, agile and pivot in times like this. Speaking of parties and so forth, we have like you said, a crisis. So this is a crisis communications effort that should be coming forth from the parties and so forth. And I just wonder to what extent it's appropriate to use the crisis itself as a campaign messaging issue. Ken, I know you have a lot of experience in this area. Is it appropriate to use the COVID-19 crisis as a political issue?
It's already a political issue, Hank. I think we've seen the opposition. I mean, I'm talking about the Democrats here, and I don't know if there are any Democrats to defend themselves on the panel. But I would say this, that's already being done. The president's actions, every single thing that he does is held up for scrutiny. And there are a lot of opinions about whether it's appropriate or not appropriate. I would say at the end of the day, campaigning is campaigning. I would caution people about saying things that, oh, the world has changed forever. It has not changed forever. Political campaigns in a democracy will continue to find a way to occur. I've already heard a lot of creativity on this panel as to ways in which to get around this crisis. And let's remember, it is a crisis. I do not believe this will be something that goes on in perpetuity. The basic element of a campaign, the basic focus of any campaign, is to touch, communicate with as many voters as possible in as many ways as possible. I would argue that going digital is not new. It's something that's been in the work for 10 years. I don't know any campaign that doesn't have a digital social media manager, which never existed before. I would say that this virus is going to accelerate that process, but we are well into the weeds on digital campaigning and digital communications. I expect this virus will speed it up, but it will also bring out the most creative elements in all of us to come around those problems. Political operators, if they're not anything else, they're very creative. I know, Hank, some of the campaign stories you've shared with me about how to connect with voters, that kind of creativity, I think, which exists in all of us, is going to, there's going to be a premium for people who can find ways around these problems. And the other element, I think, campaigns are going to have to shift resources, as we've all said, to recognize that. There'll be much more emphasis on digital communication and on touching people in all kinds of, I would say there are additional ways to touch people now. That's one of the things the virus has brought to us. But that process was well underway. I expect it to continue.
Thank you. Go ahead.
two quick thoughts on that based on the question you asked and also what Ken said. I think that there is a right way to use the pandemic to communicate, meaning that it is a prism through which you can answer your questions or talk to your supporters. And then there's an unsophisticated way. If you say, COVID-19 is forcing us to stay at home, fund this tax increase to pay for first responders. No, that's not particularly sophisticated. But if you can talk about how COVID-19 has affected the workforce, and then relate that back to some of your campaign policies, that's what successful campaigns do. And in terms of working on political campaigns, every campaign effort is you innovate or you die. And I mean, I'm being a little crass in terms of using the word die there. But I mean, you look at, George W. Bush in Ohio in 2004 integrated micro-targeting into his campaign, and it fundamentally shifted the political landscape. Barack Obama took that to the next level, and the Democrats had a huge lead. Well, guess what? The Trump campaign in 2016 more than caught up, and what has been built, at least from what I've read, Corey would know more about this, they're building a digital artificial intelligence campaign machine that is going to set the world on fire if it already hasn't, from the different ways and means that they can reach voters. So that's what campaigns do. And after Mr. Trump is gone, hopefully in 2025, there will be some enterprising Democrat that will engineer a new and more creative way to reach voters, and then the Republicans will have to catch up. It's kind of the pendulum that swings back and forth in the campaign.
Matthew's so right. If anybody would have said that a 70-year-old candidate for president of the United States would have mastered social media when he was running for office for the first time, nobody would have believed it, right? Everyone would have believed that this was going to be a young up-and-comer who had grown up in the world of Twitter and social media and Instagram. And look, Donald Trump has 300 million followers across his social media platforms around the world. I mean, it's amazing. The guy puts out a tweet and he's got 80 million followers, and literally the media responds to every tweet he puts up because a 73-year-old man has determined that the best way to communicate is directly with the American people through social media. This platform is going to look old and archaic 25 years from now, just as it did when JFK revolutionized the way that television became part of a campaign, and prior to that, the fireside chats with radio. So I think Matthew's exactly right. Campaign operatives evolve, they adapt, and while I think we have built a massive campaign, a juggernaut, if you will, I always caution the fact that Hillary Clinton had 800 people in the Brooklyn office. Well, we didn't have 800 people in the campaign in 2016. She had 3 times as many resources from a cash perspective than we did, and we still won because we had a better candidate and a better message. But now we're in the converse of that. We have the juggernaut of our campaign. We have but I don't want to become complacent, obviously, and I don't want to become a bureaucracy. And one of the things that we learned, I think, in the 2016 campaign from Donald Trump was swift, decisive, pithy responses to things seem to have been able to drive a media narrative, not always for the best, but would be able to give us the opportunity to change or tell a story. And so as campaigns progress, you will see candidates who are on the cutting edge of things, whether that's those guys who ran the Obama campaign and wrote a book called Inside the Cave and were lauded for the work that they did, or the Trump campaign of 16 and hopefully 20, because you have to win to be successful. But I think Matthew is exactly right, that as campaigns progress, we will find new mediums, new mechanisms to communicate that will make it look like what we were doing 10 and 15 years ago was archaic. And that's just how campaigns work.
Thank you for that. And just a second, Ken, I just want to hit something you said, both of you. So the president's tweets bring us back to this issue of appropriateness, using the pandemic as a political tool. It is out there, Ken. Is it appropriate? And how do you do it in a way that actually advances your campaign, helps the public in a time like this, and doesn't seem self-serving or cause damage to your message or your issue? Thoughts on that?
Well, I think overtly using it as a tool for fear is not very effective. And I think that candidates need to be putting forward positive solutions and also responding to where the current policymakers or governors or whoever are putting out how things need to be handled, and be appropriately criticizing if it looks like government overreach, for example. So I think that you can be positive in your message and saying there's a better way, but I don't think that you need to be overtly using all of this as fear mongering.
Thank you. And Gabor, is this an issue in Europe much at all, or is that being sort of kept down underneath the surface in terms of the handling of the crisis?
I mean, of course, the example with Trump and social media is a very obvious one, and it has also been tempting for European politicians who feel that let's say the mainstream media landscape is not necessarily in their favor. By taking to social media, this can somehow create let's say a more balanced feeling for their communication. And we have seen, for instance, criticism for the Prime Minister of my country, Hungary, who has made some of the key announcements about next stages of a lockdown over his Facebook page. So not using a professional studio, going to public broadcasting, holding traditional press conference, but making the announcement on Facebook was seen by some as self-serving, trying to promote this way of communication, which he has control of. By the way, it also managed to crash the Hungarian internet. So many people were trying to get on this Facebook Live. But yeah, in a way, it is bringing results. You can't deny that. But yeah, it's also a debated and debatable issue.
Thank you. And Ken?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for that, Corey, because I was just you stole my thunder. I was going to say that in the past, because of President Trump, the dynamic has changed because of his use of Twitter. I think President Obama really started the digital revolution in political campaigning like no one else. But it's evolving. It's evolving even as we talk right now. I think in the past, when a typical journalist is writing about a campaign, who's winning, who's losing, who's up, who's down, that's always the tenor of the story. And it's usually based on, one, fundraising, who's raised the most amount of money, and how people are doing in polling. I think in the future, there will be a third peg. Campaigns will be judged on how effective their digital social media outreach is, whatever format it may be. And Corey's quite right. 10 years from now, we may not even have a Facebook or a Twitter. They will have been replaced by more sophisticated platforms. So in the future, that will almost be the equal of the other two. Your effectiveness on social media, your ability to touch voters and influence what the media is talking about through direct communication will be a premium.
In the future, Ken, it'll just be you and me using Facebook and Twitter.
Well,
exactly.
We'll be old fogies.
Let me say this as a quick follow-up to what Ken just said. You know, I went over and had the privilege to help Benjamin Netanyahu's campaign as he was running for his third or fourth cycle here. He just got elected, but went over and myself and Dave Bossie, my colleague, went over and served as the senior advisors to Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I said, hey, let's get up on Facebook. Let's start text messaging, SMS messaging people in Israel. And they looked at me like I was speaking Chinese, of which I do not do. At least I don't do well. They said nobody in Israel uses SMS messaging. No one uses text messaging. Everybody uses WhatsApp. And so the point is there are regional differences and areas that the campaign that we run here in the United States is very different than a campaign that is run overseas. There are some basic consistencies, such as the use of Facebook, because it's just so prolific. But that being said, you know, look, when my mother, who's in her 70s, is on Facebook, cool candidates don't want to be on Facebook anymore, right? The kids don't want to be on. They want to be on Instagram. They want to be on everything other than something their grandparents are on. And so I learned that very quickly when we get over to Israel and we said, hey, we've got this great messaging app to text message. Everybody in the country of Israel has a phone. They said, hey, dummy, we don't use that. Nobody checks their text messages over here. So it was a learning experience. And to Ken's point, we're going to look back and find something better, faster, and build a better mousetrap very quickly.
Thank you for that. And I want to interject here for just a minute. Corey has a hard stop in less than 10 minutes. He's got that event he mentioned earlier, which he's going to have to run. So first, I want to thank you again for being here and sharing your time with us and your insight. And secondly, I want to switch to a topic briefly that you can address, and then we'll move on to others. But we've talked about the difference between incumbents and challengers, and the crisis response of incumbents is definitely a political issue, as Ken has said. Does it also provide more of an advantage in earned media? Because I know earned media can be both positive and negative. How are the different ways that challengers and incumbents should be handling the crisis in order to promote their campaigns? Broad subject, but just feel free to fire away at whatever suits best.
Well, look, let me start by saying, obviously, the power of incumbency is one that can never be overlooked. When individuals go to the ballot box to determine if the incumbent should get reelected, they have been inundated with media coverage on that person for anywhere between 2, 4, or 6 years, depending on what particular office they're running for. And the power of the presidency, and this particular president, who's been so accessible to the media, might be overexposed in some cases. He gives so much information that we have seen him now toning back those COVID press conferences that were lasting 1 or 2 hours and just sitting there all the time. It's very difficult if you're a challenger to try and compete with someone who has the largest bully pulpit in the world and has the biggest megaphone in the world. And so, look, when you're Joe Biden, I think his advisors, if I was one, I would say continue to stay in your basement, continue to limit your media exposure, because of you're so gaffe prone that you are not doing yourself any favors. And in addition to that, I would say let Donald Trump continue to go out and say things that potentially could be detrimental to him in the campaign. But on a net, the power of incumbency is an extremely powerful one. We saw the president today board Marine One to get onto Air Force One, to fly, to go see a manufacturing facility that has completely transformed its production so that it can produce masks. You can't do that in the same manner when you're a challenger.
Thank you for that. And again, we appreciate your presence. Go ahead.
I'll add quickly that the election in November is a referendum on Donald Trump. And if you read an article, Jerry Sieb in the Wall Street Journal today wrote about this very topic. I would recommend, if you haven't read it, do. Obviously there are some challenges with the economy and the state that it's in. I think though where you're going to see both candidates try to pivot to in the late summer, when people start to pay attention to this, is who has the better plan for restarting the economy and getting America working again. And what Corey said about Joe Biden, I'm sure that his advisors are telling him, just bide your time. You don't need to go out and do. Well, one, he's not particularly capable from a personality standpoint to do the types of events that the Trump campaign does. You're seeing Joe Biden do what he does best. Even then, he's making guests. He does small one-on-one meetings where the conversation can be more scripted, where he doesn't have to answer unpredictable questions, primarily because he's always been gaffe prone, and he's more so now. I would imagine that they will be leery about putting him in front of large crowds on a going forward basis, whether it's virtually or in person, for the very reason that it can't be scripted. But this is a referendum on Donald Trump, and I think it's going to be who can get America working again. And the president's narrative about doing it once and I can do it again is as compelling as any, probably more than most right now. So those are some of the unique challenges in this election cycle.
Well, that is an excellent point. And I would argue it's a referendum on the president, and it's also a referendum on every elected official in office right now. And Liz, I wanted to ask you your thoughts. You have significant interaction with the public at large. And do you detect a sense that basically this, first of all, is a referendum on the elected officials, even at the local level, A, and then B, whether or not this is impacting turnout? Are people as interested or as actively engaged in planning to vote, or is this really not something that's on their radar right now?
Yes, on the referendum question for sure. But we saw that even in our midterm elections here, I'm in Northern Virginia, which does not really represent the rest of our Commonwealth. We're very blue compared to the rest of the state. unfortunately. So I'd say overall, we didn't do well in our midterm elections up here because people up here, President Trump is not very popular up here right now because of, as I say, because we're a bluer area. But those of us who support him are just, it just makes us work harder to be in the field and try to, sway those undecideds that are still in the area. We do still have some independents. From what we're hearing, people are still planning to vote, but they are getting nervous as far, you keep hearing the calls for mail-in ballots, which of course we're not really supportive of because, there's always fraud and things that come along with that. We are actually, when we reach out to people, we had a big emphasis this year on voter registration. There are a lot of people who support the president that we're finding out in Virginia who aren't even registered to vote. So trying to get them registered to vote and then vote, it's kind of a two-stage process. We actually even, we do conservative trainings, and we actually were doing one on voter registration, training people how to go out and get other people registered to vote. That's been kind of tricky trying to do that now with everything locked down, because it was kind of go out to your friends. We were going to local rallies, that kind of thing, to sign them up. But I have seen a push for that because people are saying they're a little bit nervous to go to the polls in November. I still have a feeling that they will show up because it's a presidential year, though. The president has asked people to vote down ballot Republican this year, which should help them as well. If you like him, vote straight R. So we'll see. It's all in progress. We're at a minimum, we're encouraging people to vote absentee as soon as they're earliest allowed to do. We have our GOP primary here in Virginia, has been pushed back to June 23rd by the governor. And I think the last day to get your absentee ballot is June 16th for that. So that's the first thing up. They haven't said anything about the general election yet. That will come second. I know we have some conventions that are coming up that may not happen. They're trying to figure out creative ways to do that, like here in the 10th district. So it's just really amorphous right now. Just trying to reach out to as many people we can. And as I said, and the texting thing actually is helpful as far as asking people, have you gotten your requested now absentee ballot? And then following up later saying, have you sent it in? Because we don't know what's going to happen in November. And we don't want to lose votes because people are afraid to show up to the polls.
Thank you for that.
And Henry, I just finished a primary here in March in Illinois, was advising, helping a challenger candidate. We pushed as hard as we could for get out the vote, voting early and all of those strategies, not having any idea whatsoever that the governor of Illinois was going to shut down restaurants and basically Illinois the day before the March 17th primary. The impact was immense. Locally, voter turnout was down 29%.
Wow, that's very helpful information, and that's sad to hear. Yeah. Again, campaigns have a lot of catching up to do in order to make up the difference with what the virus has caused. Mm-hmm. Okay, we are almost at 2:00, which is when we're going to transition to the question and answer phase. I just want to put one more quick question out for very quick responses for any of you. We've seen that in both Israel and Serbia, for example, the electorates have taken things into their own hands in many ways, and it's starting to happen here across the United States. In keeping with social distancing in Serbia, many of the population has gone out to their balconies, banging pots and pans as they had done in the past to express dissatisfaction with the government. To express national unity in Israel, the population went out on their own porches and balconies, socially distancing, and sang the national anthem in unison on their Independence Day. These are just some examples of things that are being done to, advance an idea during the crisis. Are you aware of anything else going on here in the United States, in Europe, across the world, that could be an example for other populations or other electorates that wish to express opinions to their own governments?
So I'll talk about the California experience, which has been a little unique. There are groups that are out, in Orange County and places like that, that have been basically talking about the importance to end stay at home. And for those of you with beaches in your community, you can relate. There has been a massive movement of people who just want to go to the beach. 2 weekends ago, it was 95 degrees and a Chamber of Commerce day in Southern California, and the beaches were crowded. And here's where it gets to be a little bit problematic. The photos that the news media used were from 4th of July 2 years ago, when the beaches were extraordinarily crowded and people were not exhibiting the requisite distance. If you were at the beach, people were using the recommended safe space. Well, Governor Newsom made a decision to unilaterally close those beaches based on those photographs. So, I mean, the problem that governments have, the longer that the stay in place regime is mandated, is that more and more people are going to question why. I mean, first it was to bend the curve down, and so we didn't get overrun with hospital beds. There are 52 counties in California that have no ICU beds for coronavirus patients, no patients in those beds. Why can't they go out? If they, I mean, so, and this is where you're going to start to see more and more pressure build with protests. Now, I think the people that don't wear masks and tote guns and hold Confederate or Nazi flags, that's stupid, and it's not going to yield a positive result. But people are beginning to wonder, why are we staying home? We may not have an economy to come back to if we don't start loosening things up, and soon.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Matt. We're going to move to question and answer now. I just have two points, housekeeping points. First, of course, is that this is an excellent topic for campaigns, because if the electorate's actually moving in a direction and they're out ahead of the campaigns, the enterprising candidate or party or campaign organization probably wants to get in touch with them and catch up with them. Secondly, I did screw up your bios on the front end. I apologize, but we will have a link when this is posted, when all this is over, to your full bios so the folks can see how wonderfully talented and experienced you are. I'm very grateful for all of you being on the panel today, and I thank you. I'm also very grateful for Ms. Kylan Griffith, who is our student assistant, who is handling, as Dean Perry suggested, our co-moderator on the question and answer. We took a poll earlier. We didn't get a lot of responses, so I wouldn't say this is a valid poll, because the people that answered are faculty at Regent, so we're not going to use that, and that's why I didn't touch it, but thank you anyway. So Kylan, the floor is yours.
Awesome, thank you so much. So I'm just going to start with a question I found particularly interesting. People who can't go to meetings are often walking around their neighborhoods a lot more just to get out of the house. What should the role of yard signs be in a campaign this year? Is it more or less important?
Well, I've seen plenty of studies that yard signs effectively don't impact local elections. People will swear up and down, and you can argue, I'm sure, one way or another. In my opinion, yard signs actually, if they serve any role, it's helped coalesce a campaign team to accomplish a goal. And then you hopefully get that campaign team to then be able to do other bigger, greater things for the campaign as you go through the election cycle. But with that said, I don't think we'll ever not have campaign signs. And if more people are walking around, and just make sure you have your website on your campaign sign. That's the only criticism I've ever had of people who print campaign signs, but they have no way of how to really quickly reach the campaign online.
I'm laughing because the bane of my existence when I was working on candidate campaigns was the one donor who always mandated that we have lots of yard signs and campaign buttons, and would forego a comprehensive communications strategy. Yeah.
The only thing worse than that is a candidate who drives around and complains about not seeing enough of his campaign signs.
Well, I've experienced both of those, and I just want to come out and just be very direct and say I hate campaign signs. They make a mess in the community. I don't think they win you votes. And yes, it's true. If you don't have enough of them, it creates internal problems among donor communities, which is why I hate them.
It's just a complete racket.
Yes.
Maybe you want to use bigger fonts so you can see it from a car as well, not just walking by.
No,
Well, actually,
no.
billboards are, I like billboards. I think billboards actually get attention. I don't think 2x1 yard signs do it. I just don't, but if you don't have them, it's a problem. And I hadn't thought of it this way, but you're absolutely correct. I think that does do a lot of team building. That can have a useful function there. But by and large, I'm not a big fan of campaign signs, some small ones. Larger billboards, I think, are different.
I think in an area like where I live in Northern Virginia, which I said tends to be, I'll say it's purple, but turning blue. So I'll be the dissenter. I sort of like them. I do think they're kind of a waste of money, but what's nice is if you have an area that's fairly blue and you put out the conservative signs, people that maybe are kind of closet supporters that you didn't know support your candidates before might reach out to you. I've had this happen in my neighborhood here, saying, "Oh, I didn't know you're a Trump supporter. Can I help?" And they ended up working the polls for me. So me for recruiting, I use them because I put them out, and it's kind of like a dog whistle to get the conservatives to kind of come quietly, and they do. So overall, I agree with all your statements. But for me personally, it helps me recruit for volunteers. So.
What's next, Colin?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for all your answers. That was really interesting. So another question is, if social distancing restrictions are still in effect into late summer and early fall, and thus preventing large gatherings, will campaigns use technology to mimic them, including the famous Trump rallies?
So it actually becomes easier for the president's campaign because those rallies are a great way. I mean, there's the sheer entertainment value of them, where even people who aren't Republicans go to the rallies in town because it is good entertainment. But the Trump campaign collects data at those events that you have to fill out when you go into them. Collecting the data online, a lot of it you can just pull when people come online because it's in your quote unquote your digital profile. I would absolutely think that they're going to, they have been doing at the same time every single night very high production value online events that frankly they're revolutionizing the way campaigning is done. Biden hasn't quite found his mojo yet in that regard. He's clearly uncomfortable in this medium, but no, the Trump campaign is going to do it. They're going to build their massive list. They'll find out more information about these people, and it will aid them in the education and the get out the vote effort as we head into the fall.
In Europe, we see some party congresses moving online. That's a bit different thing from a campaign rally, but we are going to see experiments again in Bavaria. Christian Social Union, fairly conservative lot. They are putting their party congress all digital online coming up in May. I'm also curious to see what it's going to mean. What are going to be the takeaways? But like Matthew also pointed out, in terms of having data from such a meeting, we might have an easier time at the campaign headquarters than dealing with actual people who might have reluctance to provide some of that data.
One thing I want to point out before we move to the next question, it may seem that this panel is unbalanced in terms of political leaning, political ideology. We did have invitations to people from across the spectrum, did have some people from different viewpoints that had agreed to be on the panel and subsequently were not able to make it. So this is not by design, just for anyone that has curiosity in that area. Anyway.
I think that was my cue to keep going. But I did also just want to say a quick message to the audience. If you guys still have any questions, feel free to keep submitting in the Q&A box. We're still open. But for our next question, I guess for really all of you, how has COVID changed the themes of your campaigns? Have you had to pivot on messaging at all, or are you still trying to focus on what are your more traditionally core issues?
I guess political parties on the right side might have it easier. We haven't mentioned this in the discussion about incumbents and challengers, but when it comes to an economic crisis, I think people are more inclined to believe that the right has a competence in economy, which they don't necessarily feel about the left and socialists. At least that's the tendency in Europe. If you look at the election scenes after the 2007-2008 financial economic crisis, yeah, the map was pretty much turning blue, which is the color of the center right over here.
Hank, I can give you a perspective of, I'm involved in some congressional races this year in New Mexico, Nevada, and Florida here. And I can tell you that 2 weeks ago, the dominant messaging that we received, the issue that seemed to matter the most was security and health. That really was the primary issue. Now that we're 2 weeks later and going forward, we see a light at the end of the tunnel, or at least an opening up where things are going to go back to some kind of new normal. People are very focused on the economy. They're very focused on jobs. They're focused on jobs all the time anyway. But right now it's particularly acute because people don't know if they're going to be recovering the jobs that they've lost and what the future economic landscape will hold. So that's a very critical issue right now in all of the campaigns I'm working on.
Yeah. And in Illinois, you have the governor for the last 8, 9, 10 months been promoting a progressive income tax, and it's on the ballot to be voted for. And I know that the candidates that I'm involved with, they are using this as definitely to highlight no more government overreach, no more government intrusion into our lives. We have enough complications to deal with. This isn't something that needs to be passed. Sadly, though, it probably will still pass. But I do know that the governor's come under a lot of fire and been directly asked, do you really think that this is something that we need? And of course, he's blundered ahead and said that he believes it is needed. And I do believe that he will pay a political price for that when the time comes for him to get reelected.
So in California right now, I'm working on 2 statewide ballot measures, fighting a massive property tax increase that would hit all commercial and industrial properties, and then fighting groups that want to enact statewide rent control in the midst of, prior to COVID, what was a significant housing crisis in California. Our messaging hasn't really changed that much. We use the pandemic and the negative effects on the California economy to talk about it, but that's really the extent of it. And I think that the other side is attempting, which is public employee unions and teachers unions. They're trying to say, oh, we need this money now more than ever. But I mean, California had a $22 billion budget surplus before we went into shutdown. We're now talking about a $35 billion deficit. We have 19% unemployment, and they want to raise taxes to fund more government. So, I mean, it's even in California, which is, I mean, there's not even a tinge of red in our state. I'm being a little facetious there, but I think even moderate Democrats at this point are saying enough is enough. And Hank, you pointed out that campaign I worked on in LA County, which is 70% Democrat by registration. We overwhelmingly defeated a property tax increase. They needed 2/3 to pass, and the mayor and others were thumping their chest saying, well, 50%'s a victory, in our book. Well, they only got 46. So people are saying enough is enough. And Illinois, you're not far behind. And sadly, Liz, in Virginia, I used to live there, you're not far behind either with the way that your state's headed.
Mm-hmm. All right, I just want to say, Mark, I want to refer to a point that you made. I think it's a really good point, and I'm sorry I missed it earlier. But there are, this is an opportunity for those of us who are libertarians or who really care about liberty. This is also a serious issue that we're seeing bubbling up among some people who are involved in the campaigns that I'm watching and participating in. And that is loss of freedom. And is that going to be permanent? And are governments overreaching? Are there hidden agendas, whether they be left or right? Those are also issues that are bubbling up now, because we're talking about going forward, not what happened up until now, but what is society going to look like in the future? I would say we're getting a lot of messages of people who are fearful that government, big and small, will use this as an opportunity to gain greater power by taking away their rights, raising taxes, what have you. But it's a really excellent point, Mark. I think people are looking to see what the fundamental changes will be going forward and how that affects them. In such an environment, people will seek to take advantage of the situation for whatever reason. That's something that I would say we should be looking at on our radar collectively.
Thank you for that.
Hate to be negative, but those are things that are coming up. I hear it all the time from grassroots voters, from the candidates themselves. Where is this going? Our governor here in Florida, Ron DeSantis, took an awful beating because he was perceived by the left, I would say the mainstream media, whatever that means to you, as being too slow to close down the state, basically. Now that we're a few weeks later, people are seeing that there was actually a great deal of wisdom in the approach that he took, which was not using a one-size-fits-all approach. Different parts of the state in Florida have been impacted differently. I'm here in the 3 counties where it's still a problem and everything is still closed. But the other day, I'll be very quick. The other day I saw an elderly couple on A1A right along the beach. All the beaches are closed here. They took one step out onto the beach, one step, and 4 Boca Raton police cruisers converged as if this was a meeting of a drug cartel. These poor people survived the incident. They were shocked. The officers told them they're on strict orders. No one is allowed to go on the beach. Is that still appropriate? These are the kinds of questions we'll be asking ourselves, because I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach will work going forward. But these are the kinds of questions and concerns a lot of voters are having right
now. Liz?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was clearing my throat. I have allergies.
Okay. Do we have another question, Kyle?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually had a follow-up to the yard sign question. So many of you spoke on the ineffectiveness of yard signs. What about direct mail at this time?
Is anyone using direct mail or relying on it more heavily than before the crisis?
We use it a lot, primarily because broadcast is so expensive in California, and only the really well-funded campaigns can get it. It's too early for it right now, but you'll see it after Labor Day. Campaigns will still will use direct mail in conjunction with radio, TV, and obviously a good helping of digital. It's direct mail is still effective. It's meant to be read between the mailbox and the trash can, so you've got to be quick. But good direct mail still influences voters.
More questions, Colin?
Yeah, sure. So there has been some speculation that voter turnout may be lower in November, particularly if COVID-19 has a second wave in the fall. Do you guys think this would basically make 2020 a 2004 style based turnout election? If not, how? Just lost my place. I'm sorry. If not, how at all? If at all, will messaging to swing voters change in the face of COVID-19?
That's going to be a real challenge, because it seems that the actual fear surrounding the virus seems to suck the oxygen out of any sort of earned media efforts or getting people to focus on any sort of campaign message or anything along those lines. I would just recommend that people that are trying to get people's attention come up as early as possible and have as much of a sustained effort as possible of absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, if that's something that is big in your state, or even early voting. And as Matthew mentioned, direct mail and its impact, the best impact that I've seen for direct mail is to encourage people for locations and times and places to go to actually early vote. So if there is going to be a second wave, and most early voting is say 30 days out, just trying to encourage people to go when they feel that it's the most safest to go vote. And then also realize something that we haven't brought up, that people that are over the age of 65, or that this situation with the coronavirus impacts in the mind of people of different age groups in different ways. And so I think you maybe need to have a different strategy involving people who are older.
I guess it really is about the demographic groups as well. So like Mark just said, it's the elderly who are going to be probably most affected. When you look at the turnouts in Europe in the election so far this year, in this group the drop is really dramatic, and understandably so. So you might come up with special regimes in your election, even if you don't change overnight to mail voting or digital electronic voting, but you might want to somehow separate voter groups like we do in everyday life. In Hungary, we have hours for the elderly to go to the shops, so as not to get exposed to let's say other groups of the population who might potentially be the biggest threat for infecting them. You can come up with different practical measures. I think until November there's plenty of time for having this discussion, because on the one hand it's a democracy question, protecting the right and the ability. It's also about thinking again about the demographics. What does it mean for your key target groups?
Those are good points. Do we have any other questions, Kylan? Or I have a point if we don't.
We have a couple more, but you can go on if you want, whatever you prefer.
Just one quick thing, which maybe some of you have a comment on, maybe you don't. We only have a few minutes left, but the backbone of our election system in the United States relies heavily on elderly people, as the volunteer force in our campaigns. So this virus has really had an impact in an unknown way, especially what's coming next with the election system. Anyway, do any of you have comments on that, how it's being addressed, or what the impact might be on both campaigns and the election process itself, briefly?
Well, Hank, I'm living in South Florida, and I'm sorry, Mark.
That's fine.
I'll yield if you wish to go.
No, go ahead, sir.
We have a huge problem with that here in South Florida. Obviously, massive number of senior citizens voting here, and every campaign is concerned about that here. An excellent question on your part. I don't have a ready answer for you, but I can tell you how to deal with that problem, or the problems that will be created by a downturn in senior citizen engagement in the political process is a huge problem here. And all of the campaigns down here are trying to figure out a way around that. I would be reluctant to share some of those ideas because it's sharing campaign information, so I won't do that. Mm-hmm. But again, I'm seeing a lot of innovation and creativity on campaigns as to how to overcome that problem. And there are ways of doing it, but again, campaigns are going to have to be far more selective, they're going to have to be a lot smarter, a lot leaner and a lot smarter about the way they target voter groups and how they approach them. I think that, as I said earlier, campaigning will still be campaigning, but the tactics that we use, not just digital, but other tactics as well, will have to be very thoroughly examined, and you're going to see a nuanced approach. There will not be a one-size-fits-all approach. In every community, campaigns are going to have to find a way to contact elderly voters and get them to vote one way or another, perhaps assisting them with mail-in voting, assisting them with absentee ballots, whatever it may be. But I would say, creating a smooth vehicle for voters to vote is going to be a real challenge. And campaigns that are able to do that. In the old days, it was, okay, you can't vote, we'll pick you up, we'll take you to the polls. It will be something similar to that. You're going to have to find a way, most campaigns are going to have to find a way to make voting seamless for a lot of disparate groups who all want to do it differently. That's going to be a huge challenge.
Thank you.
And my overarching point was going to be the process itself as it applies to the voting environment that the elderly person is going to be going into, and the county clerks are going to have to put out an information campaign to elderly people that make them feel that it's safe to come to the polling place and that they're not going to get something that kills them.
I mean, so
There is also sorry.
I think it's probably time to throw the panel back to Dean Perry. Is that correct, sir?
It is, and thank you everybody for your great responses to all of these good discussions. You know, this panel has been so focused on just the real application of the things that we have to think about, the candidates have to think about as we come up toward primaries that are still to come and the November election. And hopefully by November, some of this will have gone away and everybody can do more of the traditional things. But in the meantime, and for those trying to get to primaries like in Virginia in late June, these strategies of how we can do this in this COVID environment are going to be very important. Hopefully no second wave before November. But thank you to all our panelists. It's been great to have some people that are really involved in local campaigns like Mark and Liz to be on the panel with us. For those of you like Ken and Matt that have worked kind of more with congressional and kind of statewide candidates. And of course, earlier we had Corey Lewandowski, who had to step away working at the federal level. And of course, Gabor as working with the political parties in Europe. Very different way that they campaign, but we're very glad that you were here and just talking to us a little bit about how the Europe climate is being affected by some of these same questions. It's a global problem. So we're very glad you're here. I think all of this discussion is really going to feed into our students learning and our campaign strategies and management course. And actually Professor Jones, he's going to be teaching that course for us down the road. He's working on it now, I'm sure. And so I bet he's going to be grabbing some of the things you guys have shared. And maybe he'll put the students on solving some of these problems. You know, okay, we got to create a solution for getting the elderly to the polls. How's that going to look? And you know, questions about the social media strategies. I mean, you know, all of this will be great for our students in our master's concentration in campaign strategies and management. So thank you all for contributing to the civic discussion of this, contributing to the learning of students in graduate programs in Robertson School of Government, and to all of us who listened online during these days. We have one more panel coming up tomorrow. So those of you who are listening, let me just invite you back. We're going to be talking about what's next, forecasting the post-pandemic landscape. And this is a very international panel. We've got folks from the European People's Party, and we got the former communications director for the presidency of Iraq that's going to be on the panel. So you may not know their names, but these are people who certainly have dealt at the highest levels with things that have gone on in the Middle East, in Europe, and of course, still across the United States. But looking at that post-pandemic landscape is raising big questions for us. And so it'll be a little more maybe of a guessing game, a theory game. You know, how do we think this is going to work? And so it's going to be exciting tomorrow. That's at 11 a.m. Eastern time. Greenwich Mean Time -4 is Eastern time. So that's 3 p.m. over there at the Greenwich Mean Time. So figure out where you are. among all that, or if you're on the Pacific coast of the United States, out in California, you'll be watching us while you're eating breakfast at 8 a.m. So anyway, that's what we have going on tomorrow. It's our last webinar. And we just thank you all for joining us. And I thank you, our panelists, for being such an important part of our discussions that we're running here from Regent University. Thank you again. Thank you, Hank, for running the panel.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.